What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We are currently on step 11. I believe Tom has posted a link if you'd like, if you haven't been at the other meetings and you'd like to go back and listen to our discussion of the other steps, the first 10 steps. There is a YouTube channel that we created, and that has all of the videos. There's over 50 of them now, I think. So we've been at this for a bit over a year, I think, at this point. So we're on step 11, and we've had good fortune to have Herb come and talk about step 11 twice. And I started a discussion on that where I made the analogy that that step 11 is to, or what prayer and meditation is in step 11 is it's what focuses to awareness. And I like to think of step 11 as expanding our consciousness, expanding our awareness, because our awareness is so central to us living the kind of life I think that we all want to live. But let me put this in context, because I like to do this, right? We didn't just show up at step 11 without doing a lot of work before this. Steps 1 through 9 were really teaching us a lot of very important tools, or giving us a lot of very important tools in terms of creating this life that's based on emotional sobriety. Things like that happen in the first step, is that admitting what's going on for us, and totally owning what's happening. And we just saw what happened to us is by admitting our powerlessness, there was this paradoxical change that took place, that we were just able to discover another power. And by looking at our unmanageability, we started to figure out how we could live a different life that wasn't about controlling everything. It was about letting go and learning how to flow with things instead of controlling things. That becomes an important part. But we also saw that as we were going through these steps, that hope was important, making a commitment, learning, developing a practice of self-examination and inventory, being able to do what we call true speaking, being able to be honest with ourselves, and that self-honesty, such an important piece. And then being able, as Brian just said, is realizing the importance of having an enlightened witness in our life and being able to share with someone and being open to their guidance and letting ourselves be moved and influenced and taking some direction, trying things on, that attitude, let's try it on and see how it fits, knowing that we can't solve a problem with the consciousness that has created it. And then we move into steps 6 and 7, where now we're really going to aim at becoming, bringing the best possible attitude that we can bring to our life, right? Letting the best of us do the talking for the rest of us, so to speak. Then, when we make that now conscious decision to develop the best possible attitude, we sit down and we look in our past. We take responsibility for what we've done wrong, not only to others, but to ourselves. And then we get on with the business of cleaning up, the wreckage of our past. That's the first 9 steps, learning these kinds of tools. Step 10 comes along and says, now that you've done that with your past, because that was about now and then, we need to make recovery here and now. We can't keep in the now and then, because it's about what we're doing now, right in this moment. that is or isn't going to support our recovery. So step 10, 11, and 12 is now integrating everything we've done in those first 9 steps into our daily life. Step 10 is a recapitulation. It's an integration of everything we've learned in steps 1 through 9. And steps 11 continues to do that, and 12 continues to do that, and pushes us further and further in that direction. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are steps of integration. Because unless we integrate what we're experiencing into our current lives, it's not going to be available for us to use. What you've integrated is available for you to deal with what's going on in your life. And that's where integration becomes so important. You know, you hear Tom Rutledge all the time talk about practice, practice, practice. Practice makes permanent, not perfect. It makes permanent. It builds that into our life and it becomes a part of who we are. So that becomes a very important part of what's happened now. We're integrating. That's what we did in step 10. We're integrating. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admit it. Now, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. And we talked about to improve our consciousness, right? To think about it that way, to prove our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. I want to talk about knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out today. That's the part of step 11 I want to focus on. What does this mean to seek knowledge of his will? What is that? Can I know what God's will is for me? Do I even believe in a God? You know, I think those of you that have heard me talk right now is I don't embrace a traditional concept of God. I consider myself spiritual. I consider myself as very much grounded in a humanistic spirituality and psychology. In fact, I was telling Herb, that's the kind of spirituality that he really introduced me to, is what I consider a humanistic spirituality. I've always been drawn to humanistic psychology. So trying to understand, you know, what God's will for us is and where does the power come to carry that out takes a very interesting, I think, path for me. And so I'm going to try to articulate it the best I can. So I want to do that by kind of putting this into a context. My dear mentor, Dr. Kempler, gave this great talk, and maybe one of our programs, I'll play parts of it for us to listen to or watch. It was called The Psychological Development of Man. And he started, he says that in the beginning, the world was really split into 2 different conditions, good and evil. God was good and evil was the devil. Now, it's very interesting. And once again, I'm not a theologian, so if Herb's here, he'll clean up any faux pas I make in terms of discussing this, is that in the beginning, you know, Adam and Eve were in this paradise that God created. Everything they wanted was available to them. But there's one thing they couldn't do, and that was eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And so, you know, Eve, I guess, looks at that apple and becomes very interested in the apple. And that, my understanding is, the serpent in the garden was encouraging Eve to eat that apple. And a lot of theologians interpreted that as the original sin, right? Is that our sensuality, our desire, right, took Eve to eat that apple. And that's when all the problems started. Now we now no longer in paradise, and now we're, you know, everything got messed up, and now our humanity is all about this thing, and there's good and evil and all of these other things that we have to negotiate. Well, it was very interesting. I was at a continuing education conference recently, and it's Dr. Alan Michael Vincent said, I have a different interpretation of what happened in the Garden of Eden. He says it wasn't her sin or sinning that got her to eat the apple. It was something that's very human. Now you're going to hear where the humanistic psychology comes in. It was her curiosity about what that apple would be like to take a bite of. It wasn't what was wrong with her. It was what was right about her. You see, so what happened is first there was this good and evil. Then Freud comes along and he says, now the problem is there's a life force, eros, and a death instinct called thanatos. Very similar to the good and evil thing, right? That, we have this life force in us, but we also have this death force in us. That's now the dark side. That's the other side that we've got to wrestle with. And the it was all about that dark side that just wanted to do whatever it wanted to do, didn't care about anybody else. And then the life force comes in and tries to balance that out. And that was Freud's original idea, but it was still good and evil. And then the humanistic psychologists come along and they say, well, maybe we don't have to talk about splitting the world up. Maybe instead of thinking about original sin, we could just think about that there's goodness, that man wants to cooperate. Man wants to find a way to connect, to join, to be a part of, to belong. But man also wants to be his own person. Man and woman, I should say. People want to be their own person. And so now the issue isn't good and evil, but it's this desire to cooperate with this desire to be our own person. So that we start with this strong desire for a we, to be connected. And in fact, our life starts with the we. We are one with our mother. We are a part of her. We are completely undifferentiated. We are existing inside of her womb. We feel what she feels. We eat what she eats through the umbilical cord. She provides us with our life force. And then when we're born, the I starts. We differentiate, right? By taking our first breath, we start supporting ourselves. But at some point in time, that child is still very much in a we consciousness. And you can see it. I mean, if you hang out in my house, my 3-year-old is still in the we consciousness. She thinks when she calls me or her mom that automatically we're living our lives to serve her. I mean, Daddy, I want my iPad, or Daddy, I'm hungry. And now the food's going to magically show up. There's no consciousness about, can Daddy do this now? Is Daddy doing something else? Does Daddy want to do it? It's, I want it, and Dad's going to serve me. Now, it was very interesting when Dr. Vincent was talking about, well, he made this one comment by a developmental psychologist. He says, well, how do children learn about their edge? Meaning, how do they start to differentiate? How do they start to say, I'm not mom, mom's not me, mom's a different person, I'm who I am, and mom's who she is? How does the child know that edge? And what this developmental psychologist said that was so brilliant, by denying that there's an edge. Now, let me see if you can get that. What they're saying is when I act like there's no edge, what you're going to do is push against me and start telling me, hey, I'm not here just to serve you. You're going to have to wipe your own ass. You're going to have to learn how to do that in the bathroom. You're going to have to get your own food at some point. You're going to have to get up and get that for yourself. I'm not here to serve you. So now the trouble comes in. The child's wanting a we. Parent comes in and says, nope, it's not going to be a we, it's going to be an I. And now there's conflict. That is healthy conflict. The big mistake a lot of parents make is they don't want their kids to be upset. So my God, they're going to give in to everything. and create these little tyrants that run around and ruling everybody and everyone, and they're running the household, right? Because we don't want our kids to feel bad. But we're missing the whole point, aren't we? Is that development is going to involve frustration. It's going to involve disappointment. It's going to involve learning how to deal with things when they don't go your way, and the frustration that comes out of that. Well, we are wired to continue to move towards wholeness. So when I think of seeking through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only knowledge of his will for us, I believe that we are wired, whether it's you want to call it the life force in the universe or whatever it is, it's God-given to move towards this differentiation, towards being whole. Everything about us is moving towards that completion. We want things to be finished. We want to be complete. We want to be what we can be. That force is strong in us, and it's very strong in us. The problem is when that force is attached to what I'm going to talk about as conscious and unconscious compromises of who we are, then we end up in serious trouble. And the conscious and unconscious compromises are, I can't be whole, so I'm going to try to keep as much of my wholeness as I can, but because of the situation I'm in, I don't know how to do that. So I will compromise myself, but keep enough to ensure my existence. That is the adaptation that each and every one of us has made in our life to get to where we're at today. And we've cut off very valuable parts of who we are. We've disowned very valuable parts of ourselves. And we've now emphasized other parts that we saw as essential to our existence, to ensure our centeredness, our wholeness, to whatever degree we could. So now when we come to this step, what I see this is about is a constant movement towards this wholeness and trying to learn how to respect the instinct in me towards connection and also the instinct in me towards being my own person, towards being myself, and how to learn to balance these so I can become whole. The problem that we have is that cooperation in our culture is overemphasized at the cost of individuality. There are so many things that conspire against you expressing your individuality. You shouldn't be this way. You shouldn't be that way. I'll never forget early on when we had these meetings, a friend of mine came and he shared, his name is George, and he had such a great analogy because George, is a unique guy. He's very much, his own person. And he gave the analogy, which I thought was great. He says, when we come to the program, he says, I liken it to the landings on D-Day. Depending on what boat you were in and what sector you were, assigned to land on, you either had a walk in the park onto the beach and you establish a foothold on the Normandy beach, or 8 out of 10 of your friends are dying as you're getting off of the landing craft because you're met by this, fuselage of bullets and explosions. And that's the truth. You see, we are all finding our own path. Every one of our path is unique. There's no other person out there that's like you. No, there will never be another you in this world. Your mother and your father came together and they created you, and that will never happen again. That unique combination of genes and DNA in terms of creating us, each one of us is incredibly unique in that way. But everything that happens as we're developing is to encourage us to give ourselves up to cooperate. And it creates an incredible imbalance where we either become egomaniacs and we don't want to do anything because we don't want to lose ourselves, or we give ourselves away all the time. And we have no idea how to stay in the middle. That, I think, is the calling I see, that I feel called to, and that I think each and every one of us are called to, is how to balance the we and the I inside of us without compromising either one. And I'm telling you, you can take that on, and it's a lifelong journey with it. We'll continue to talk about this next week. At this time, I've gone a bit over than I usually do, so I'm going to invite my discussants in the room with me and to make a few comments about this, and then we'll open it up to everybody. But by the way, I wanted to say what's going to happen. Next week, we'll continue this discussion, and then on the 17th of February, Herb is going to do a prayer and meditation for the whole group. Tom, good evening.
Hi.
Roger, good evening.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, have at it.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I will say, I'll be brief because saw through prayer and meditation, and it's the knowledge of his will for us. Step 11 has become for me. I don't know that, your lens of the emotional sobriety has, as with all the steps during this process, has impacted my view of this. But I think that step 11 is something that's been evolving for me from the very beginning. And for me, it is, I love the word you used earlier on integration. It is my conscious contact with what I ultimately believe in. It's like I wrote a book years ago called Earning Your Own Respect, and the essence of that book was basically that you can't really be congruent with your value system if you don't know what your value system is, and our value system evolves and changes throughout our lives. I'm not talking about just the idea, the big values like don't kill anybody for no good reason, or that kind of, but the things that matter to us at different times in our lives. And what it's evolved for me is what you talk about practice. I think of it as more philosophy than psychology. And I think of it, I've been using the term recently with some clients as medicinal philosophy, which is the practice of a philosophy, what we actually believe in. And specifically what that has been, I'll just say that because I don't know how to talk about this without it being a personal thing. For me, it has been about learning how to not what I call live defensively. And I just wrote a thing just today or yesterday, actually, about what that is. And I'm just going to read it and see if it makes any sense to people. And we can come back to it later if it does. Living defensively is wasting time making decisions to protect certain perceptions of ourselves that we are afraid to be without. Basically, living defensively is like being afraid to really just let myself be who I really am. The second part of that is I let myself be myself in the second sentence, in that it is a system that is very likely filtering out some of our very best shit. And so to me, that's step 11. We're going to make that conscious contact. We're going to make a decision on what we believe in, and we're going to create a practice that is based on that. And that's what I feel like I'm doing. I feel like I'm doing that more effectively and more consciously and more clearly than I ever have in the past. So thanks again for adding the emotional sobriety lens to this step, Alan.
You're welcome, Tom. What you said just jogged a thought on my part, which I think is so important here, is that in one way of thinking about this, step 11 is saying, continue to come out of your trance.
Yes.
The trance that we all go into, and that we come out of it with consciousness, right? It's becoming conscious again. And the trance is that we were all convinced we had to be a certain way to be okay.
Yep.
Just like you were saying, I just love what you said about the defensiveness. And that another thought about step 11 is that, my God, we're now saying, continue to wake up, continue to challenge this stuff, and still look for areas you're still in their trance, that you're still operating out of conditioning, rather than, what we're talking about is obtaining this personal freedom. So that was great, man. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Roger.
What comes to me when you're talking about this, Al, over and over again, is the word "and" rather than the word "or."
Mhm.
And as I've mentioned before, I'm not someone who sits on a daily basis and engages in formal meditation, but I do pay a lot of attention to the experience and idea of meditation and focus throughout my day, at a lot of times in my day, in terms of breathing awareness and body awareness and aware of the present moment and my sensory awareness. But I also give a lot of thought at the level of intention to how do I bring together who I am in a way where I meet who others are, in a way that helps us move forward in some sense. And that's what I think of as conscious contact with God. I think of it as I'm part of this field, always, this field, this environment, this social environment, physical environment, that includes me and is not limited to me, right? That includes me and is not limited to me. And all the time, I'm veering off course, moment by moment by moment through my day. And all the time, if I'm conscious enough, which often I'm not, obviously, I need to bring myself back to this awareness of how do I honor myself and my own need for authenticity and wholeness, and how can I do that in a way that's and rather than or. How can I do that in a way that also honors the desire for wholeness of those around me? Right. And it's hard. It's very, very challenging. It's much easier to go either or. Always easier to go, sacrifice myself for the whole, or sacrifice the whole to myself, right? And
that's
you talk about
the compromises, Rod. See, those are the compromises I was talking about. Is that somehow we learned those compromises as a way of functioning,
right? And we talk about individualism, and in a sense, it's true. At a societal and political level, our culture is viewed as a highly individualistic culture in a lot of ways compared to the way other societies and cultures are organized. But there's a lot of confusion about that, because in some ways we are a highly individualistic culture, and there are some positives to that. From my point of view, there's a lot of negatives to that as well. But to me, that just reflects the same dilemma that we're each in at an individual level, right? In terms of how do I try to balance my own identity, my own sense of self, with the bigger picture, with the larger context that I'm in. So that's all I wanted to add to that. So I'm eager to hear what other people have to share. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Once again, let me make this announcement that if you tried to come into the Emotional Sobriety Study Group tonight, the hour before this meeting, there was some confusion and the link that was sent out did not work. You're going to be sent another link. We're going to do it next week. So we will have the group. So sorry about the confusion tonight. And I'll see everybody in that group next week instead of this week.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.